Throughout the first half of the 19th century, the United States expanded westward across the North American continent, believing it to be their destiny to spread democracy and American values from sea to shining sea. There were unfortunate consequences to this, such as the Trail of Tears, one of the greatest tragedies in American history. Under President Andrew Jackson, the Cherokee Nation was forced to surrender its land, and the natives were forcibly relocated to the Indian Territory, now modern-day Oklahoma. Upwards of 15,000 Native Americans died from starvation and disease. In 1848, the United States successfully defeated Mexico in the Mexican-American War and gained what is now the states of California, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico. The Oregon Territory was also a point of contention for the ever-growing United States. The territory was claimed by the United States, British Empire, Russian Empire, and the Spanish Empire. Spain ceded its claim of Oregon to the United States, and the United States threatened Russia as its actions were in violation of the Monroe Doctrine. The United States and Britain could not agree where their claims began and ended. Decades earlier, the United States and Britain established the border with Canada to be the 49th parallel between the Lake of the Woods and the mighty Rockies. However, the U.S.-Canadian border treaty did not apply to the Oregon Territory. Certain pro-Manifest Destiny politicians in Congress wanted to set the border at the 54th parallel, which would have given the U.S. British Columbia a land border with Alaska. In order to prevent a conflict, the United States and Britain agreed to draw the border at the 49th parallel in 1846. William Henry Seward was Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson. He had negotiated with the Russians to purchase Alaska. However, the deal had to be put on hold for several years because the United States had more pressing matters to attend to. Following the war in 1867, Congress approved the Alaskan Purchase. Seward had also proposed to buy the Virgin Isles, Greenland, and Iceland from the Danish, but those deals never came to fruition. In a bid to get natural fertilizer, Congress passed the Guano Islands Act in 1856, allowing any American citizen to annex islands for the United States as long as they have bird guano on them. While not terribly important, it is interesting as the islands that were annexed are still in fact under the control of the United States as the U.S. minor outlying islands, despite them being completely uninhabited and being swallowed by the ocean due to climate change. In 1867, the United States officially annexed the Midway Islands, and in 1903, President Roosevelt put it under control of the Navy. Midway used to be a crucial stop on trans-Pacific flights during the early days of commercial aviation and was an important military outpost up until the 1970s. Midway is most famous for the battle fought between the United States and Japan during the Second World War. Hawaii, however, was the jewel of the Pacific. Hawaii had a wealth of natural resources like fruits, coffee, and sugar that made it incredibly valuable to American planters. Hawaii was also important as a military installation and is where the U.S. Pacific Fleet is headquartered. The last queen of Hawaii, Liliuokalani, began cracking down on American planters. In 1894, the monarchy was overthrown and the Republic of Hawaii was established. They petitioned the United States to annex the new republic, and in 1898, the United States annexed Hawaii, and in 1900, it was officially made a territory. It would become the 50th and so far final state in the Union on August 21st, 1959. 100 miles from Florida, the Spanish and the Cubans had been fighting a war for Cuba's independence. The Spanish regime in Cuba was brutal and oppressive. The American press sensationalized the rebellion, and American sympathy for the Cuban rebels grew. The demand for an intervention in Cuba was growing. In the government, a group of jingos were pressuring William McKinley to take action, including Secretary of the Navy and future President Theodore Roosevelt. The United States had sent its most powerful and advanced warship yet, the USS Maine, to Havana in order to protect American interests in Cuba. But then, at 9:40 p.m. on February 15th, 1898, disaster struck. The USS Maine had exploded. 260 of the almost 400 crew members aboard the ship died that night. While it is now believed that the Maine had exploded due to a critical design flaw, in 1898, a Navy Court of Inquiry had investigated the remains of the Maine and determined it was destroyed by a mine. The public had every reason to believe Spain was behind this event, and Congress pressed for a declaration of war. Efforts to solve this problem diplomatically had failed. In April, Congress issued a resolution declaring Cuba's right to independence and demanded that Spain remove its forces from the island or face intervention. On April 25th, Congress declared war on Spain, thus beginning the Spanish-American War. The war itself was brief and one-sided. There was no way the Spanish could have possibly won. Less than 300 Americans died from actual combat. Disease killed more than 6 times as many people than who died in combat during the war. Theodore Roosevelt led the Rough Riders to victory during the Battle of San Juan Hill, a decisive factor in the war's end. Commodore George Dewey sailed from Hong Kong to Manila and defeated the Spanish fleet stationed there. Spain surrendered on July 17th, bringing the war to an end. Following the Treaty of Paris signed by the Americans and Spanish, the Americans were given the last of the Spanish Empire, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. Cuba was allowed to be an independent nation at last, and only once more would it be so influential on the world stage. The Philippines was important for asserting American influence over China as it was right at China's doorstep, and Guam is still a very important military installation in the Pacific. Unfortunately, the Filipinos did not take too kindly to their new imperial rulers. During the Spanish-American War, the Americans and the Filipinos, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, had a common enemy. The American annexation of the Philippines crushed Emilio's dreams of independence. In 1899, the PhilippineAmerican War began following a skirmish outside the city of Manila. Traditional warfare centered around the city devolved into guerrilla warfare across the archipelago. Even though Theodore Roosevelt declared an end to the war in 1902, fighting would continue intermittently until the Japanese began occupying the Commonwealth in 1941. Following Japan's defeat, the U.S. regained control of the islands, and in July of 1946, the United States granted independence to the Philippines. On March 31st, 1917, the United States acquired the Virgin Isles from Denmark for a price of $25 million. Following Japan's defeat in World War II, the United States annexed the Northern Mariana Islands from Japan. Japan had annexed these islands from Germany, which got them from Spain. In 1970, the islanders voted no in an independence referendum and instead wanted to increase ties between them and the United States. In 1975, the islands were given Commonwealth status. In 1878, the United States had established a naval outpost in Samoa. In 1899, an agreement between the US and Germany had split Samoa in half. The Germans would take the western islands of Samoa and Americans the east. But in 1951, control of the islands was handed over from the Navy to the U.S. Department of the Interior. In 1977, the territory's first elected governor, Peter Coleman, took office. Since then, all the territory's governors were democratically elected. Currently, the United States has 5 inhabited territories: Guam, Puerto Rico, the American Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and the Northern Marianas. These territories are self-governing to a degree, but since they are not states, they do not get a vote in Congress, nor are they able to vote in presidential elections. They do elect a non-voting representative for the House, however. If you were born in Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Isles, or the Northern Marianas, you immediately become an American citizen. However, in American Samoa, this is not the case, and they are currently suing the federal government over the matter. In 2017, Puerto Rico was hit by 2 Category 5 hurricanes in a row, destroying the island's electrical grid and leaving it without power for months. Guam is still to this day an important Air Force and naval base, and has recently been in the news because of the ongoing North Korean crisis and crazy threats that have been made directed towards the island. The future of these territories is still a mystery, whether they will go on to join the Union as a state, or become independent, or sink beneath the ocean. Only time will tell.